From PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs
and WETA Wellbeings.
This is On Our Minds
with Matt
and Faiza,
a podcast about teenagers and mental health, because life is hard.
And we're all going through something. And hearing stories about what other teens are going through and how they're getting better, it helps.
A note before we get started. Today, we're going to be discussing what mental health is and how to talk about it. If you or someone you know needs help, we have a list of resources at studentreportinglabs.org/mental health resources.
Also, we recommend you listen to this podcast with a friend or a trusted adult. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Faiza.
And also hello to all our listeners. Welcome to the official start of On Our Minds Season 2.
It's our first episode. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good today, and I'm really excited for what's to come. Conversations about the fear of missing out, how to cope with losing a friend or family member,
the stress of competition, eating disorders, LGBTQ identity,
race, culture, friendship, music, so much to look forward to and so much to learn from.
You'll hear from a lot of teenagers, of course, but also doctors, experts, and even a few famous people.
Like the singer Madison Beer
and the filmmaker Ken Burns,
who is one of my role models. We should first define what we mean when we say mental health.
It's a term that people use a lot, but we don't always know how to define it.
Here's some proof. Student Reporting Labs was at the South by Southwest EDU Festival in March, and students went around and interviewed people attending the conference. Take a listen to these interview snippets.
In your own words, what is mental health?
Mental health is... This is a great question. I feel like I should have more of like an answer ready, and I don't. And I work a lot with mental health.
Yeah.
In your own words, what is mental health?
Mental health is being able to... How do I want to put it? Mental health is being able to sort of live your life.
Mental health is hard to define because it includes so much.
Oftentimes, lots of people can complicate what mental health means, but I just like to think of it as how we feel, emotionally, socially. It's our general well-being.
I like that. General well-being, or maybe the state of our general well-being, since it is always changing.
And everyone has mental health, just like how everyone has their own physical health.
Exactly, and everyone struggles with something.
Students from around the country sent in audio diaries to Student Reporting Labs, sharing some of their biggest struggles right now and who they turn to for support. We'll be playing some of that audio throughout the season, but one thing that really stood out is that it can be hard to talk about how we feel. Let's listen to what teens have to say on why it's so hard to open up.
I know I have so much to unpack regarding my mental health, but it's hard to do so when you don't even know where to start. Growing up in a household that did not really encourage speaking about these topics has made it very difficult to understand what I'm feeling, let alone share those feelings with others.
I think we don't talk about it because I feel like people think it makes you look weak, or that you're just being dramatic, or, it's a phase, you're a teenager, everybody goes through it. But at the end of the day, it's never gonna become normalized or be supported if we don't talk about it.
Most of the time when I go to people and they don't, and I feel like they're not listening, it's not so much that they're not listening, it's just they try to relate, so they tell about themselves, and then the focus off of me. I get you're trying to tell me, like, a related experience that you had, but you're not helping me no more.
Sometimes parents complaining about asking their kids, oh, how was their day, or how are you, and only getting monosyllabic responses. And I think with that, parents and just older people in general need to be prepared to accept that maybe, what they're doing isn't working, and then move forward and try to communicate with their children and try to create and foster an environment where the child feels that they can communicate with them.
I think it was really hard at first for me to be open about it because I couldn't even understand it. I couldn't articulate it. But as I started that exploration and learning about all the things that I was going through in my head that I couldn't quite understand, it was easier to say, hey, I'm having this problem and this is how I feel to my friends and my family, and they would either say, hey, I've gone through the same thing, or how can I help? So it gets easier to say what you need to say and get the help that you need once you learn to speak up about what you're going through.
Many of the students expressed that they're having a hard time both articulating their feelings and also talking to other people about their mental health. That's why this episode will be devoted to giving you tips for talking about how you're feeling or talking to others about how they're doing.
We spoke with Alita McCalman from WETA Wellbeings, which is a partner of this podcast. Wellbeings has made a mental health language guide, which we will put a link to in the episode notes.
A main component of the mental health language guide is the person-first recovery model, which was new to me.
Me too, but I really like it. Here's Alita talking to us about what the person-first recovery model is and why it matters.
Words mean things, right? And the way that you talk to someone and with someone and about someone, especially when it concerns their mental health, what you say and how you say it could be the difference between a negative and a positive situation. You know, in the person first recovery model, it prioritizes the human being first. You are a person first. You are not your diagnosis, right? So instead of saying this person is depressed or saying you are this diagnosis or you are this mental health concern, no, this person lives with depression. Depression doesn't define them as a human being. You are always going to be a person first, no matter what happens to you, no matter what your lived experiences are. That does not negate your humanity.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. I feel like people reduce human beings as what's on the surface.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In the same way that you would say this person has high blood pressure, why wouldn't you say this person has schizophrenia or this person lives with diabetes? Why wouldn't you say this person lives with anxiety? You know, it doesn't take away from you as a person just because these things are occurring.
I agree.
If we as a culture, as humanity, change the way that we talk about these things, people will be more likely to open up and share their lived experiences and, you know, save more lives.
Yeah, so one of the main core purposes, I would say, of this guide is to help people have these really effective conversations about mental health. And I know that from my personal experiences that I feel like even just by starting this podcast, I feel like I've been able to expand that and have more effective conversations. And I'm also very privileged in the fact that I have a really supportive guidance counselor in my school currently. But I do know that in 8th grade, I didn't necessarily have the best guidance counselor who wasn't very accessible to me. So my question in regards to that is, what would you say to someone who would like to discuss their own mental health struggles with others, but they might not feel like they'll be received very well, or maybe the space may not be safe enough for them?
I would first say your feelings are valid. At the end of the day, full stop. Your feelings are valid. It's hard. It's kind of scary sometimes, but there's hope and there's help. So if you do have friends or family that you feel comfortable talking to, that could be a good place to start. If you don't have that supportive family, you have a doctor, they can, you know, help you find specialists or therapists or anyone that you need to see. And if you don't have any of those, there are anonymous tip lines. There are hotlines, there are warm lines, there are text lines. These resources exist. And I would absolutely implore you to go on Mental Health America. There's a subsection that says, who can I talk to about my depression? They have great resources there. And again, I'm not the professional on this. They are, right? So sifting through some of those resources in the back of the Mental Health Language Guide, there are a bunch of organizations who do this mental health work. Those are good places to start.
I've been trying to use that person-first model. Like, I'll start to say I'm anxious or I'm sad and then catch myself and say, I feel anxious, since anxious or sad isn't who I am.
It makes me think about how in Spanish we say tengo miedo, which directly translates to I have fear. Just because I'm fearful in the moment doesn't mean that I should let that feeling of fear totally define me.
I think that example really shows that language matters. Both language and our thinking are so interconnected. Our language or word choice depend on each other, and the words we choose really color our world.
If feelings didn't matter to us, we wouldn't have such a vast umbrella of words to describe specifically how we're feeling. Just like how the words angry, mad, annoyed, and irritated have very different meanings and connotations behind them.
Next, we're excited to introduce you to someone who has some tips for talking with friends and parents about our feelings. Her name is Disha, and she will be a regular contributor to the season of On Our Minds. Hi Disha, it's great to meet you. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today and speak with you all.
First, to explain your role to our listeners, you are a mental health special correspondent for On Our Minds, which means you've been doing a lot of research on the topics that we'll be discussing, and you'll be coming onto the podcast occasionally to give facts and statistics and conduct a few interviews.
I'm really excited to do that, and I've been doing research on eating disorders, mental health, the LGBTQ identity, alcohol, drugs, addiction in teens, and much, much more. We have some interviews scheduled for this season that I'm very, very excited about.
Tell us a bit about yourself, what grade you're in, where you're from, and how you first got interested in mental health.
I'm a junior at Etowah High School, and I'm from the greater Atlanta, metro Atlanta area in Georgia. I'm interested in studying psychology and am in the process of publication on a manuscript all about mental health within tutoring centers. My interest in mental health started about 2 years ago after taking AP Psychology for the first time, and I really loved learning more about how adolescence and mental health is so important and what we can do as a community to better our understanding of mental health.
That's great to hear.
Now, for teens out there who want to talk about their mental health but don't necessarily know how to start that conversation, what advice do you have for them?
It's always easiest to start with talking to someone you trust. And I know sometimes it's hard to have these conversations with our parents. And if you don't feel like your parents would be accepting to learning about it, one thing you could do is talk to a counselor and have them open that conversation with you for your parents. That's something that definitely helped with me. And it's really important that we have an empathetic strategy when talking about our feelings and being accepting of others. I also like to always ask the question, do you have the emotional capacity for me to talk about my feelings right now? Just to make sure that I'm not burdening any of my friends.
Yeah, I personally had that same experience where I've often felt fear when talking about mental health, especially with my parents, because in the past they've really kind of sometimes dismissed it. But after, I started talking more openly about mental health and more candidly about it, I think they've recently opened more up to the idea. So I think it's just really important to have those open conversations.
I also had a very difficult time opening that conversation with my parents when I found my mental health struggling a little bit, and I had to go in with being okay with being vulnerable with them without knowing how they were necessarily going to respond. And I usually like to start conversations like that by saying, I feel this way about what's going on in my life and I need help in these areas, and letting them kind of understand my perspective. Because I think as young people, it's so easy for us to just not know how to communicate with them, so we won't communicate with them at all. Or when they ask us about it and we don't know how to respond, we tend to lash out.
I think that my personal recommendation for that is speaking with guidance counselors, especially those from your school. I know that at least more recently, guidance counselors have more of these resources. And then I think my parents, I would consider like a second line of support then. So I think it is important that when you are speaking to adults, it's good to understand that there are different types of adults who can be helping you with those different situations. Now, Disha, I have a question for you, which is, how do you maintain good mental health? And for our listeners, do you have any specific tips or advice on that subject?
I make myself go to sleep at midnight no matter what, because I know that if I don't have boundaries set for myself, I'm going to work until 4 a.m. because I think we all want to get the best grade possible, and a lot of us are willing to sacrifice our own well-beings in order to get those grades. In order for me to be the most productive and to be able to handle the coursework I'm taking, I have to take time for myself. And that's why I always say self-care isn't all bubble baths and candles. It's really understanding your boundaries, understanding where you need to prioritize time for yourself and time for school, and going to sleep on time.
I think that's super impressive that with such a intense course load that you're able to go to sleep at midnight, because I know that for me that doesn't necessarily happen, and I feel like sometimes I'll be able to finish my homework and take a shower and be ready for bed at 10, but I think just because I've been in such a cycle of not getting a lot of sleep, I just kind of end up staying up really late, which is not good for me. And like sleep is just so important, because if I get like 4 days in a row when I sleep at like an appropriate time, like my skin clears up, I'm just in a better mood all the time. Like sleep is just like so important, and we just don't get enough of it.
Personally, like during finals week from last semester, like I was having panic attacks like almost every other day. And one of the reasons for that was because I was not sleeping. I like pulled 3 all-nighters that week just because like I had finals every day. So I needed to make sleep a priority. Like if I'm not done with my homework, I'll worry about it in the morning. And somehow like it all gets done. I don't know how. I might be cramming it before class, but I still think that having that healthy boundary is better for me than trying to stay up and get it done.
I feel like you only realize once it catches up to you, and that's like also your breaking point. So it's really bad. We need to stop that cycle. Thank you so much, Disha. I'll definitely take those tips into mind.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's be honest, Faiza. Since we spoke with Disha, have you been going to bed earlier?
Honestly, I actually have not been able to. School has been really super stressful lately, especially with upcoming AP exams. But I actually talked about this with my friend yesterday, and I came to a realization that I tend to get less than the recommended amount of sleep.
I'm actually kind of proud of myself because I've been pushing off some of my studying for AP tests onto the weekends. So actually this week, I usually go to bed at like 2 a.m., which is awful, but I've been going to bed at midnight for the past 4 days in a row, so I'm going to take that small victory.
Disha also interviewed a professor of psychiatry who has written a lot about the brain, Dr. Daniel Siegel. He said we can't do anything well, including having good conversations, if we don't get enough sleep.
We'll play an excerpt from Disha's interview here, and then we'll also release a longer version of that conversation, since it's too good to cut down.
This season will be a mix of episodes like this with lots of different conversations and voices, and then we'll also give you longer one-on-one conversations.
Here's the excerpt from Dr. Siegel speaking with Disha.
What we now know is that sleep allows you to take these byproducts, which when they accumulate, they're toxic for the brain. And they lead to a number of problems like you can't focus attention, you can't remember as well. They even lead to changes with the way your body handles food. So getting really enough and good sleep is like the number one issue I want to say to all adolescents. And sometimes it's going to take adults reworking the timing of school, which schools aren't always open to doing. So it's a little complicated because the adolescent brain is on a different time schedule, to stay up later, but to sleep later, but then you got to get up for school. So you're literally not getting enough sleep. So we need to work together on how to approach this.
Honestly, this sparked an idea with me. I think I might have a conversation with my school board and see what we could do about this, because I walk into the classroom and everyone is talking about how little sleep they got. And it almost kind of feels like a competition. Like someone will be like, oh, I only slept for 4 hours. And then you hear somebody, I only slept for 2 hours. I had like 3 homework assignments I had to turn in by midnight.
Getting good sleep is one of the most important starting places if you ask, how can I help my brain remodel in the healthiest way possible? So the amazing thing is what you do with your life, like getting enough sleep, like exercising, like focusing your attention in certain kinds of ways we can talk about, that integrates your brain, and then that's going to set your brain up for the rest of your life.
I'm curious, Matt. If you could choose, when would you want school to start?
If I could choose, I would want school to start at 9 a.m. And that's because I could be asleep at midnight, then I could get 8 hours of sleep, and then that gives me the hour to actually commute to school, get my stuff ready in the morning. So I'd say probably midnight. Okay, not midnight.
It's okay. So, I'm so excited to hear Disha's whole conversation with Dr. Siegel.
Look out for that longer conversation. And then after that, we'll be sharing student stories about social life, friends, and the fear of missing out.
We did it, Matt. That was our first episode.
Yay. I don't know what to say there.
I could really feel the emotion. Today's episode was produced by youth media producer Briget Ganske with help from production assistant Jaylah Moore Ross.
Executive producer Leah Klapman, SRL Senior Director Elise Estrada, and the rest of the Student Reporting Lab staff.
Music by Blue Dot Sessions.
And many thanks to Alita McCalman for lending us her time.
Once again, if you or someone you know needs help, we have a list of resources at studentreportinglabs.org/mental health resources.
And tell your friends about us. Spread the word. The more people who know about mental health, the better.
Yay! Woo! That was a lot of fun.